to businesses. So there has been a different level of work, and that group has worked incredibly hard to actually make sure all those business rates were paid out. So it's an area where we will no doubt catch up. We've always had an exceptionally good incredibly hard to actually make sure all those business get into any difficult paid out. So it's an area where we will no doubt catch up.
Thank you, Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go on to the particular point about the IT service desk and IT provision in the council, because I understand obviously in the budget proposals there's a coverage of an extra £3.5 million to tackle, but hopefully, the issues that obviously are ongoing with us having a lot more flexible approach to people working all over, as well as working from home and out in the community, hopefully as we open up more. One particular typo, I think it may be, although it would appreciate clarifications in the appendices about the service desk, it refers to April, June 2020 as comparison to 2021. So I just want to confirm that that is supposed to be 2021, and if not, why is there a difference in the reasoning for those different periods? But I think it's just a little mistake. And also more generally, in terms of looking at the IT service desk, can we just confirm obviously more generally about the fact that I understand that we're in a situation where obviously the number of staff has been reduced. Could you provide more provision about what's happening with the IT team to make sure we can actually improve the service going forward, obviously given the increasing workload? Thank you, Chair.
Well, in that respect, actually, the figures are a bit out of date, and we give you the latest ones. We actually have been recruiting staff into that area to actually improve the position. I apologise for the error. In terms of as Councillor Firth referred to, the staffing situation in the digital area, we are aiming to recruit significantly. We have put a very substantial amount of money into next year's budget. There is quite a change going on within the service. We've got a very substantial team, but they are supporting an enormous number of applications across the city. And Leonardo Tantari, since he's come in, has been looking at how we consolidate those, so we aren't supporting hundreds of applications, and we reduce that kind of maintenance type of provision, and actually employ more people who are actually solving problems, actually integrating applications across the council, so it kind of works as a seamless whole. So we're as you say, £3.5 million will be going into it, but in a very different set of skills, I think, from perhaps what we've seen before. And some of that money will not be used for employing our own staff, but also commissioning others to actually do work for us. They are. I've mentioned already that we are looking at some significant issues for us, I think, in terms of recruitment challenges in the coming year, and none more so than in digital, actually, where the market is very hot and it's quite hard to get hold of people. Part of that will be, I think, dealt with by, let's say, commissioning the private sector to do bespoke pieces of work for us. But we are also looking at the competitiveness of our salaries to make sure that we are paying enough to actually bring in the core people that we need, and also actually looking at how we bring people right in at the beginning of their careers, and looking at apprenticeship routes and ways in through graduate programs and so forth as well, so that we do actually bolster the numbers that we do employ. But on that, back specifically to the help desk, we have been successful in bringing in some additional support there, and that is making a difference.
Thank you for that, Neil, and appreciate the further information. The concern is obviously we're in a situation where obviously we are the second biggest council in the country in terms of staff numbers and also area. I just wanted to ask, really, obviously we have the figures here for first time fixes when you call up, but what other metrics are available to understand? For example, how many calls are abandoned, how many calls are actually made in the first place? And has any comparison in particular been done with anybody in the private sector more generally or in another organisation? And the reason I ask that is because I do have a further question, if the chair would allow me later, about more generally how we're analysing statistics to obviously make sure that we are performing at the best that we can be given the circumstances. So is there any further information that you can provide on that, or is that something that the department is looking into more generally, as it will be quite important to make sure that that 3.5 million is obviously is useful and also successful? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Firth. I think we've got the help desk coming next month in terms of to give more detail on all those questions. But I think those are really helpful now, because that will give them a heads up about the sort of questions that you will quite rightly be asking. So I suspect Neil doesn't have all those numbers now, but hopefully made some notes for next meeting. Is that okay? Now I'll let Councillor Firth ask his next question, if that's okay.
Okay, not a problem. Right. Well, looking forward to that further detail next time. I wanted to ask, obviously, it was mentioned earlier about the fact that we want to make sure that our books and also our finances are open for scrutiny. One particular concern has obviously been subject access requests actually getting processed. Obviously, it's fallen by 23% to actually get those processed. It's only 12% for freedom of information. Can I ask what particular work is being done around that to make sure that we are a accountable organisation as much as possible?
Just interestingly, this is the FOI aspect is something I've been interested in, and so they're coming next month as well. I don't know if you want to. I mean, it's clear that maybe I've seen the problems ahead. Neil, you can answer if you've got.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming out from several positions really. So I think there has been an issue around level of staffing, which we've been addressing and getting more resource into that. But there is also the issue of process within the services themselves to actually make sure that there are timely responses to the central team, and there have also been some changes to the software which we employ to kind of get further on top of it as well. So I hope we'll be making some progress in this area. Again, we can go into more detail maybe in next month when you've got all the figures in front of you.
Thank you, Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to our chair for being so on it when it comes to certain issues that I'm also interested in. So it is appreciated, and look forward to that in the future. There was one thing I also wanted to ask, a general question, which is obviously there is a look at the diversity of our workforce. Obviously, there is a mention of a term that we previously mentioned earlier in the meeting that should probably be not used anymore in the word BAME, but also more generally in terms of the analysis of religion, because obviously that it looks at no religion included that. And so I wanted to ask, obviously 27% of Leeds residents say they have no religion. So how does that compare within Leeds City Council?
Actually, this one I can answer with Vic. So on page 239, I think Councillor Firth at the bottom of that table, I think it's saying sorry, no, it doesn't answer that question, does it for you?
Apologies, 69% of the workforce stated their religion, and that included no religion.
Okay, well, I think there is a breakdown of that. I think we can find that for you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor McKenna.
Bottom one yet. Yeah, I was looking at staff sickness, and I was surprised to see that mental health was 36.4% of absenteeism compared to coronavirus, which I would have expected to be higher. And it was only 12.4%. So mental health was 3 times higher. So we've lost 3 times the amount of days, work days for mental health as we have for coronavirus. I assume we are in the coronavirus period from 2020 to current date, or maybe September last year. So it is very surprising, but it also gels with the first report we had regarding mental health was brought up. I was going to ask a question on that. I won't ask now, but it seems to me, Chair, that it's a very important issue. And are we doing enough to deal with it? I mean, to say that 1 in 3 people plus are off of mental health compared to other illnesses is concerning.
Yes, we are covering the coronavirus period. I think it has been a general trend over the last decade or more, really, to see mental health becoming the predominant reason why people take time off. And one can speculate, I suppose, on some of the cause for that. I think they possibly are connected with greater stresses and strains in people's lives, but also perhaps more of a confidence to declare it than perhaps might have been the case 20 years ago. So we've kind of got a combination, I think, of, if you like, of extra problems and extra confidence. In terms of what we're trying, I think it's also quite right to raise what are we doing about it. I think that we have raised the profile of it very significantly. I think over this last few years, Tom Reardon himself has been, a great champion of work on mental health, and you've seen in a way we'd never had before. We've put support into the HR processes, the actual work around things like mental health first aiders, as well, has been a terrific initiative. I think to date, it's fair to say it's struggling to sort of see the impact on on bringing it down. I think hopefully people feel better supported and perhaps less judged, but actually finding ways to actually impact in terms of actually reducing the amount of time people take off. We've yet to see the effect. So I think it's worth looking at the evaluation of the different initiatives we're having. You say which I think we could probably pull back in terms of qualitatively people saying that they feel better supported, but we do need to do more work on what actually will make a difference in returning people to work and actually preventing people having to take time off in the first place.
Thanks, Neil. That's helpful. But it does appear to me that if we're recording 36.4%, it's probably higher than that, isn't it? Not many people will actually give mental health, or a lot of people won't give mental health as a reason why they're off sick. So it might be something that we need to understand more. It is taking an awful lot of our workers away from their desks or their jobs. And from what you said, it seems to be growing. So it seems to me, Chair, that this is hugely important, and we ought to try to understand it perhaps better than we actually do at the moment. Thank you.
I think that's a fair comment, Councillor McKenna. I can see Tim, do you want to comment?
Yes, just a quick update on the coronavirus question there. It's an interesting quandary because you may have some members of staff who are diagnosed with coronavirus but are asymptomatic, but are still able to work from home. And so I know colleagues in HR are looking at how to sort of account for those people because they're fit to work, but they can't obviously come into the workplace, but they can still work at home. So it's an issue that's affecting not just Leeds Council, but other local authorities too. And as I mentioned, HR are going to be looking a little bit more about how they can account for those instances.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Burke. Councillor Cooper, yep.
Before you bring any more questions, I think that Councillor McKenna is quite right to identify the issue of mental health and absence in our workforce, and there is a focus for the organisation and through HR actually to prioritise that as for us to look into and address as a matter of urgency. So I think you are on it, as Councillor Firth would say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. Okay, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cooper, you probably upset the question I'm going to ask, but no.
But what I were going to say is in relation to Councillor McKenna's comments, it's absolutely right. But sometimes the statistics are very, very misleading indeed, aren't they? Because COVID will obviously have had a huge impact on mental health. And I know that from a kind of a practitioner approach. But I think rather than the stark 30-some%, need to drill down and find out exactly what percentages within that, what it represents. Because sometimes with some, and it's a whole range, isn't it? From extremely unwell to just suffering things intermittently. So perhaps it's a different approach whereby people can, very much like COVID, work from home, because it might be, anxiety stops you going into a group, for instance. So perhaps an alternative range of ways of working that would support and better help people who are suffering from mental ill health in an intermittent way.
Thank you,
I couldn't agree more, Councillor Burke. Thank you. And there are already, I must say, we mustn't forget there are already a lot of work ongoing to support people who are suffering mental health within the organisation already, but our priority going forward has got to be around tackling it, not only for the benefit of the organisation, but the people suffering it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Okay, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Do we have any context around timing of this? If they said 6.4%, is it to the end of September? And if so, do we have the end of September for the previous 2 or 3 years so we can see if there is a COVID impact in there?
That's the first bit of your question. Sorry, what were you referring to?
Sorry. So looking back at the mental health absence of 36.4%, there's no time frame on it and no comparison with the previous period, which I just think would be interesting to know to see if it is going up or if it's been 36%-ish for 3 years or more.
I'm happy to provide that information and circulate a response to you in due course.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Yes, Councillor Chapman.
Sorry, just an observation. In terms of breaking out the coronavirus stats, I take it you're looking at something along the lines of a field sort of desk split, so people that can sit at a desk, you can record their absences and get those results, and people that are out of the office all the time as a field worker to get that split, because that's where the difference will be, isn't it?
That's right, and I'll catch up with my colleagues in HR to find out exactly how they're going to account for those different splits, and again we can come back with some more information on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any other comments at this point, so thank you very much for coming, Tim, and we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the Best City Ambition. I think Simon.
Sorry, Chair, I have to leave at this point, but thank you.
I understand, that's fine.
Thank you, scrutiny members.
Yeah. Okay, so on this, we can assume that we've read the paper, but I think you might want to make some opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you. The Best City, the refreshing of the Best City Ambition was the initial draft based on quite a lot of engagement early on, was considered by the Executive Board just before Christmas. And then we embarked on a public consultation, which has just closed. So we're kind of in the middle of quite a tight time frame, actually, in terms of taking on board that feedback and turning that around. So the final version of Best City Ambition will be considered by the Executive Board and full council in February. And I just thought very quickly, just maybe pick out some of the feedback that we've had from the consultation and talk about next steps. So you'll recall that the purpose is a big part of the driver for this was learning from our response from the pandemic, where, much deeper partnership working, much more active pooling of resources and much stronger engagement with communities has been a really big part of our success, I guess, in terms of responding. And we've got the opportunity to think about
how we reflect that in the kind of our overarching ambition and goals. So that's what the intention of the Best City Ambition is. We've refocused it around the kind of, again, some of the terminology perhaps will develop over time, but the 3 pillars, so health and well-being, inclusive growth, and climate change, zero carbon. But we've also tried to take time to explain some of the principles about how we intend to continue to progress in working in partnership and with communities across the city. So that's the kind of the heart of what the Best City Ambition does. And it is intended to be a fairly minimalist account of what our ambition is, in that it will then inform and shape and amend other strategies and action plans that we and partners have. In terms of the response from the public consultation, we got over 280 responses and overwhelmingly positive, both about the overarching structure, but also some really helpful comments about some of the detail. But again, to very briefly pick up some of the key elements, I think strong support for those 3 pillars that I've just outlined, strong support for strengthened kind of community engagement and working with the third sector. There was a feeling that perhaps ageing well, being an age-friendly city and a child-friendly city should be reflected more strongly in the work that we've tried to do. There's a view that disability wasn't picked up strong enough, and we're going to be doing that. There was a view that perhaps housing and the relationship between housing and health wasn't clearly articulated enough, so we're going to do that. There was also, and there's been some press around this, some views about the plain English element of these sorts of strategies, which is also very difficult to do. Then you've got quite a wide audience, from an informed audience of a partner policymaker to a person a resident. We are doing another sweep of it, and again, we'll do our best, but we may need to do some various different kind of products as a result, aimed at specific groups, because it's kind of quite difficult for one thing to try and do all of that. So that's what we're going to do. It will be going to executive board early February, and then to full council. Just to finish in terms of next steps, I think first thing to reiterate is that we believe this is the start of an ongoing process rather than the end. So further work will need to happen. One of the first things we'll need to do is begin to think about, okay, what does this mean for the supporting strategies and action plans we've got in existence, how they will need to be amended, maybe streamlined and consolidated going forward. Particular interest for this board, we're going to refresh the performance framework, but we think this year should be a transitional year, and we'll come back to you with that as that work in progress. And then the final thing is we need to think about its impact at a local level. And I think the locality review and the neighbourhood and community reviews are really pertinent in terms of shaping that. We work with those colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I think I'd agree with all those comments that the feedback said needs to make sure that's included. Okay, for comments, Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for that introduction. I just want to say that it is concerning to hear that only 280 responses have come in so far to the consultation. I understand that you probably feel the same way, because you want to hear as much response as possible to what the council wants to do going forward. My concern is that potentially there are so many ongoing consultations throughout a time in which life hasn't fully returned to normal, that actually members of the public are maybe switching off to an extent some consultations, and this one in particular may have a very big impact on the future and the strategy of this council, and therefore it is a concern. So my first question is to ask what is being done to supplement it out in the community to make sure that we absolutely get out there and make sure that people are aware that they can have their say. Thank you, Chair.
Think you. I think our view is that this is kind of, I'd say it's the start of a process rather than the end. And I think we need to kind of continue the engagement. What we've done throughout, even before we put pen to paper, was we've been to community committees, we've been to partnership, third sector groups, various groups across the city. And I think we'd want to just keep, there's not a stop to it. I think the public consultation isn't a stop to that. It's, as I say, I think it's a start. And what our view would be really keen probably over the this transitional year to continue those discussions with the communities. And I think we certainly haven't turned any invite to go and talk to partners and stakeholders and communities down, and we want to continue that, really.
Well, thank you for that response. It's not that you're not turning down invitations, it's actually that people are actually aware of the consultation and therefore want to take part. And I remember obviously the discussion that took place in particular at the Outer North East Community Committee, where, for example, in the Harewood ward, we have 10 parish councils. And as a result, we asked, has it been considered that the consultation is going to be discussed with those 10 parish councils? They discussed, and that was something that was noted. I don't know whether there's been any further progress on that, but for certain areas of the city, for example, mine takes up nearly a quarter, if not more, of the geographical space of the city. And therefore, as a result, it makes that further to also discussions that happened at full council 2 weeks ago about considering the outer areas of Leeds all the way around the donut ring that it surrounds the city centre, to make sure that ultimately we are engaging with everyone out there, because ultimately if they're not aware of it, for example in Wetherby, then they're not going to engage with it. And the worry is with anything that we've expressed in the past in relation to the year of culture, etc., is to make sure that those outer areas are not ignored, but if they're not aware of something and not getting involved, it therefore becomes something that doesn't celebrate or discuss the whole of the city, but actually just focuses on those areas that are more likely to respond. So I think that certainly it would be helpful if you could provide more information on what action has been taken as a result of particularly the Outer North East discussion, but also what's actually happened across the board, because, for example, in Outer Northwest for Councillor Flynn and other colleagues have parish councils as well. And I'd be concerned if that hasn't been acted upon, simply because they represent a big chunk of our communities and they are elected members as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do that. And I think the community committee discussions were pretty pivotal in kind of shaping it. And I think that's why I referred to the review of the community neighbourhood review and the locality review, because I think that relationship with all of the city in terms of how we implement the strategy, but also what does it mean for those localities, is going to be really pivotal in actually whether it succeeds or not. So I think we can do that.
Thank you. I think there is a real challenge in terms of how do we get people to fill in this survey and how easy is it to do? So I imagine that sometimes you click on a survey and you get to page 3 and you think, well, I'm done with that, and I close it. I've certainly done that with LGA consultations. So I think there's a challenge about how accessible it is, and also what mediums of you're using to get it out there. So are we linking it with other posts that's been sent around the city anyway? For example, waste letters and Facebook and the usual avenue. So that I think that is a fair challenge. Okay, do you have another question, Councillor Firth?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think it's really critical, because there are town and parish councils across the whole of our city. In different parts of the city, there are local forums, etc. And I think they are absolutely critical, because the concern that we have is the fact that obviously without people being aware, they're not going to engage. And 280 responses, I appreciate that council officers are working hard to try and get responses, but 280 on what the strategy is for the city, unfortunately, is below par from where we should be. And I'm sure obviously you want to get more than that, and let's hope it does increase. And I really want to know whether the action points that we raised at the Outer North East Community Committee have actually been acted upon. So if that could be directed through the chair to come to us, because I'm pretty sure that all of my colleagues on that committee will be absolutely, very interested in hearing what the results of those are, because they were clearly stated to Councillor Dowson and others at that meeting that was absolutely a priority, because of the fact that our communities are quite different in terms of the fact of how they're represented, and also how decisions are made at a local level by not just councillors in Leeds City Council, but parish councils and town councils and other community groups. One thing I do want to raise as well, though, is obviously there is a mention in the report of a number of propositions to government. Obviously, we hear from our colleagues in the administration that obviously it states that not all the levers are required to fully realise our ambition are within the city's control. Now, obviously, these elements are included partly as a response to several calls from the government to make sure that people in places consider the ideas and present those to the government. Can you confirm if they haven't been included, where there is a list of those propositions that have been made to the government and a progress report on those that have gone through? Thank you very much, Chair.
As I say, it's currently quite a narrow time frame in terms of pulling the final version of the report together. There's a live debate about the scale and breadth and nature of what asks of government we identify to put in the final version of the Best City Ambition. And we've been working with colleagues in CLT and had initial discussion at Cabinet, but that is still a live issue. If I suspect we will probably say some general principles in a relatively brief way in the final version of this, which will then be developed further and communicated further.
I don't want to dominate discussion, Chair, so if anyone else wants to come in, but my concern is that the situation here is that this consultation is holding accountable what the administration and this council wants to set out as its strategy for the next few years to make us the best city to live in and grow old in the country. And my concern is that if the government is actively asking for local authorities, and obviously we've had the advancement of the West Yorkshire Mayor to add into that mix, that if those asks are being made, therefore, why should the administration or the council be afraid not to include those in the report? I think that ultimately it is about saying if this council wants to grapple the issues that we're tackling, want to tackle in the city, then it should not be afraid to tell us what they're asking for from government, especially when the ask has been made by government in the first place, for people to take the initiative and say, if you need something doing in your city, in your community, then as a result, come to us with a proposal. And we want to hear and make accountable, obviously, those decisions that are taken by this council to approach the government for that. If you have any further information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. I think that's a piece of feedback for Simon to take away back for, as in our consultation from us as the Scrutiny Board. So thank you for that, Councillor Firth. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Chapman next.
Yeah, just very quickly. And apologies if I've already got this and I've missed it. Have we got a copy of the consultation that we can actually use? A printed, is there an electronic version you can send to us? I'm establishing a local community cafe once a month in my ward, and we could maybe pick questions out of it if nothing else. I mean, if it's too long and complicated, then we can pick certain questions out and ask them each month and see if we can get some feedback that way as well.
There was an online consultation which was a simplified set of questions which closed week before last. But we wrote the draft version with questions embedded in it. So there is that. I say it's an ongoing dialogue. So continual feedback. We say as the approach develops, we can clearly need to take account of feedback and the results of the engagement. So.
And Rob's saying he'll send those questions round. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Carlill.
Thank you. Just a couple of points and questions really on how it goes. I mean, I think obviously we've had the engagement community committee, so I asked a lot of my questions, gave a lot of my feedback there, but I think what we're best doing then is scrutinising the process that we're following and how that goes. I understand in a way this is the one plan that brings everything together, and a lot of the kind of specific asks that Councillor Firth raised maybe in those other documents. So for instance, having quite a hand in the transport strategy, I know we lay out quite at depth in there what we think we may need as additionals from the government in order to deliver our transport strategy and say our 2030 net zero ambition. So I'm guessing what's in the Best City Ambition will take account of all those other feedback and consultation that we've had around those service areas, because I know there were thousands of responses to the climate consultation, for instance, and then to the transport strategy there were huge numbers. I think what would be useful for us to have a reference to, because whenever we look at those consultations where we've seen those numbers, there is a huge difference in where those comments come from. So in the transport strategy, there are lots of areas that are very heavily impacted by either lack of transport or by too much transport going through their communities in terms of private cars that don't engage. So the point was made there. I actually represent one of the outer areas of the city. The point was made there around the outer areas, but quite often in the inner communities, we don't have as many responses to the consultation. And that's purely because there's a lot of people with a lot to do just to make it through that week, let alone to be able to answer the consultation. So I think it'd be really useful to have a breakdown of what kind of responses we've had to the consultation. Sometimes that's not easy because it might be a group that represents a certain aspect of the population across the city, but I think it'd be useful to see that. And could you lay out a little bit further on what the consultation will look like going forward? So when we have got these ideas, put them into a document, what's the next stage for that?
I think there's a number of bits. Firstly, I think we would want to come back to all the community committees in a further round of discussions about what is the relationship between the goals and the ambition of the community committee and the best council plan, and what's I guess a local interpretation of the best city ambition for that community committee. And I think that's one element of it. I do also refer to the ongoing neighbourhood and community review and the locality review, because I think the interface between the best city ambition and those reviews and the outcomes of those reviews is probably quite important as well. So that's one element. I think in terms of ongoing, we're also looking to, as I say, the next steps, think about that relationship with all those other strategies that, you use the example of the transport strategy. So yes, we've drawn heavily from the existing strategic framework, but if we're going to be successful and if it's going to have an influence, then we also need to have a two-way influence in terms of the revised ambition and what that means for those strategies going forward. So I think on an ongoing basis, so it won't be some sort of formalised big bang, but I think as those strategies come up for review, we'll need to look at them through the lens of the best city ambition and think about what that means for the review of those strategies. So it's kind of a more organic kind of ongoing dialogue rather than a set piece structured beyond the discussions we're talking about with the community committees, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask about the social progress index that's being developed? Two questions, really. One, how did you decide on the drivers that would influence the actions? And two, the themes, but you've removed the themes from any economic indicators, which almost in my head seems counterintuitive, because in a really deprived part of the city, as opposed to a really affluent part of the city, you would get, I suspect, very different answers or have a very different need to the same situation. So I'm just two questions. One, how did you develop it? How did you decide on the drivers? But removing the economic indicators, I think, is perhaps counterintuitive to me. Thank you.
So the Social Progress Index falls out of the work that we did as part of the REAP MIT program, which was regional economic. I'm looking possibly to Neil, who might be.
It's the work which was done with Boston, MIT, with cities around the world, where they've developed this index. And I think part of the issue is that they were arguing that there are lots of economic indicators and there wasn't really a good social progress set as well. So it's not that the economic indicators won't be there, they will be. These are actually sort of supplementary ones which kind of track your progress. So I think they've used this thing which kind of has got international comparisons And then I think in terms of the choice of indicators, there's been there's always an element of judgment in these things, but there's one of the things which they wanted to make sure the people who have been working on it is that it's something which is available at least every 12 months. So it's, it's not something which we go years without reporting. It's something which there is some degree of available of national information, so you can make some comparisons. It's also something which you can break down to at least a ward level, so you can actually reflect the differences which obviously are going to occur within the city. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit experimental, but it's trying to actually sort of supplement the quality of information which people have in the city to track progress, not only of the city, but of the areas within the city as well.
Thank you for that. Would it be possible, perhaps through Chair, that we could have sight of the indicators, the questions, the information gathering kind of process? I'd be really interested to see that. Thank you.
Yes, I can see nods, so that's good. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Firth, did you want to ask another question?
Thank you, Chair. No, I wanted to ask a further supplementary to Councillor Burke's point, which is to ask, really, is there any particular reason why it's prevented from going even further down than ward level in the Social Progress Index? And the reason why I ask for that is because I represent one of the most affluent wards, if not the most affluent ward in the city. But at the same time, I have a number of areas of communities that have similar levels of deprivation as areas elsewhere in the city, that if they were in a different ward, they would have more attention. And my concern is that obviously in relation to the COVID figures, the vaccination figures, the testing figures, we've been able to drill down through the NHS down to that local level. And my only concern is that major communities in an area of my ward, which is a quarter or more of the size of the geographical size of the city, that areas are being effectively missed, or that a simple line drawn on a map could mean that one community gets more potential focus than another. So could you confirm what stabilisers are being put in place to resolve that, and why it has to be ward level and not further, or is it just a first step before an ambition to get there in the future? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, just to caveat it, the social progress index work has been led by our colleagues in city development. So we've been working closely with them, but so hence Neil and I are picking this up between us. The simple answer in terms of ward level is data reliability, in that actually the more local you get, the less reliable the data is. And the social progress imperative is the organisation that invented the social progress index are very cautious about going below that local level because of data reliability. That said, the point you make is extremely well made, and actually we are seeing if it is possible to go to mid super output area rather than, so that would help. But it's a really live topic, and we're exploring whether we can do it or not, but it's something we're going to try and do.
So I think actually in reality, most of the things, Councillor Firth, will be available at mid super output area, which is about 8,000 people. Probably won't be able to get down to the 2,000 level, which is the super out low, the lowest level for many.
No, thank you for that clarification. The reason why I say that is because, as I mentioned, the various different parish councils, each of those roughly has an average population of between 1,000 to 2,000, if not less than that. And as a result, you're mixing together communities that are, if you take an example of a pinpoint of Cross Gates, you could, if you in Leeds, in East Leeds, if you were going to take 8,000, you could be including areas that as far up as Harewood, then go further down beyond Cross Gates. And therefore, it's not even the fact that, unfortunately, it is areas like that that are potentially being missed. But I appreciate that ultimately we want to make sure that we have the most robust case to be able to make certain proactions, etc. The one thing I do want to ask as well is obviously the reason I mentioned earlier about the parish councils and otherwise trying to hear what's been asked of government in terms of the levers available is simply because this report is about the ambition. And I want to be able to say that when we put that report out to the public, fully, and it's a strategy is therefore developed in full, that we're able to say, this is the ambitions that we want to achieve for the city. And therefore, if we have that ambition, this is what we're doing to make that happen. And that isn't a party political point. It's just simply the fact of saying that if we want to achieve something by 2030 or beyond, then we should be more than willing to say, this is what we're trying to do to make that happen. But if we can drill down into certainly looking at certain areas, because obviously my ward as well has the lowest number of council properties, for example, in the city, but it's certainly those areas are significant. They're in certain areas in particular, and I certainly don't want their needs of the most vulnerable in our communities to be drowned out by the fact that they are drawn by a line in the, well, line in the sand is the wrong phrase, but a line down a certain road or whatever, to make sure that they are getting what they need to have the opportunities that everyone else deserves across the rest of the city. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take that last one as a statement, if that's okay, Councillor Firth. I don't think there's a direct question in that. Are there any other questions from board members or comments? No. Okay, so thank you very much for coming. I think you've got some extra information to provide. If you write to Rob, and he will circulate it around the board, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 12, which is the work programme. Just so at the start, I think the only thing that's come, I won't ask Rob to go through it, I'm afraid, because I think you've read it. I think the one recommendation I'm going to make is if we change our electronic diary invites to last until 1, and then people are less likely to book other meetings. Okay, any other comments, Councillor Firth?
No, thank you, Chair. I think the point stands, obviously, I raised it last time about cabinet members and also more generally officers that had to leave early, especially when they've been waiting a whole meeting, and then eventually we get to the part which they're obviously here to speak about, and they're unfortunately unable to stay for the full item. And that is a concern. I appreciate we brought the meeting forward by 15, 20, 30 minutes, but ultimately we need to make sure that we can hold them accountable, because obviously we want to be scrutinising it. The other question I was to ask was, obviously we've had a very long agenda this meeting and also the previous meeting, with areas that have taken up a significant proportion of the meeting. Therefore, as a result, is it not the case that either we look at potentially having more meetings in the future if possible, or more generally we need to look at how those are established? Because I'm very glad to hear we're going to be discussing a number of topics that you've very adequately pointed out as well. But my only concern is that are those getting as much scrutiny as they need to be? For example, the report this morning has got more scrutiny than anything else, and potentially we could have gone even further. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, the short answer is we could always do more scrutiny. We've got to find that balance between how much work program we want to do, and that's a difficult challenge. This meeting was longer than we expected because when we were planning the schedule, the city ambition hadn't been put in there. The previous meeting we had an extra item about West Yorkshire? Yeah.
We did the working group as well.
Yeah, and so we've had a few things put on us at the last minute. What I've never wanted to do is I've wanted to use the time the best we can, so fill up the agenda rather than leaving space for an emergency item. But I take your point that perhaps in emergency items we should have additional meetings. The challenge obviously with that is then how do you ensure everyone's available for it? And so I think there's different levels of people who work and not work, and obviously that brings a challenge. Generally, my preference is just bang in a meeting and sort of just crack on as you were. So that's generally my preference. So we've been meeting every month, and we've had an extra meeting in December, which I think historically there hasn't been. You know, my take is we're probably busier as a board than we have been for a long time. It's probably at least partly my fault. Councillor Firth, do you want to come back?
No, I appreciate that, Chair. I think the simple point is that you can establish how busy we are and how attentive you are by the simple fact that when I have raised particular issues today, you've already got them noted down. So that's great. But I think that just the general point is that I think that going forward, I think it's just that we don't want to avoid scrutinising serious issues when we're in a much better financial situation now than we were just a few months ago, but ultimately at the same time that is getting ample scrutiny, because ultimately that is obviously one of our major responsibilities, and I want to make sure that that's not drowned out by further issues that are also coming out. And I think ultimately as well, the fact that colleagues have had to leave the meeting, I appreciate it's not your fault, neither is it anybody's fault, but it ultimately means that then there's not further questions that might have meant that this meeting may have extended further with other colleagues being here.
Okay, take that point. Are there any other comments to make on the work programme? No? Okay, so with that, thank you everyone for attending. Appreciate your time and see you next time in February. Thank you. Bye.